The signal was 17 seconds old before Commander Vetharis acknowledged it. 17 seconds. In that span, the Dominion's forward scout array had catalogued 3 more unremarkable systems in the outer fringe. A red dwarf drowning its own children in radiation, a gas giant wider than most minds could hold, a debris field that had once been something worth remembering. Then the ping from Relay Station Co-9 interrupted everything with the particular insistence of a transmission that had been bounced through 14 encryption shells before anyone let it breathe. Vethara read it twice. Then he set it down on the console and looked out through the observation port at the planet below, blue and white and brown, spinning in absolute indifference to the fact that it was about to become extremely important. "Confirmed?" he asked. "Confirmed," said his second, Len Aureus, whose 3 secondary eyes were still blinking through the data stream. "The asset is terrestrial, 3rd planet from that star. Class M biosphere, nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, carbon-based dominant species, they call it. Their pronunciation is difficult, something approximating Earth or Earth. The transliteration is ambiguous. And the asset itself, pionic. Grade 7 minimum, possibly higher. The collective's instruments barely registered it at first because the signal pattern doesn't match any known sapient psionic architecture. The shape of her mind is," Lenores paused, clicking his secondary jaw the way he always did when words failed him. "It is not alien to us, it is human, which makes it more alarming, not less." Vetharis had been in Dominion service for 60 of his species' years. He had seen psionic-grade assets before. He had neutralized 7 of them personally, in that clean, professional way the Dominion preferred. No mess, no martyrs, no stories that outlived their tellers. He had never lost one. But a human psionic was something different. The collective's archives had 17 entries on human psionics, and they all ended the same way, with notation code Delta 7, which translated loosely as the situation was not recoverable. The species itself was young, fractious, tribal in its loyalties and extravagant in its violence, and possessed of a creative capacity for self-destruction that had, the Dominion's analyst estimated, a reasonable statistical probability of resolving the human question before the Dominion ever had to. Vetharis had reviewed the projections himself. The nuclear developments alone were enough to generate institutional optimism about the species' long-term prospects for self-management. He had filed the relevant reports and assigned his attentions elsewhere. But psionics were different. A species' overall trajectory was one calculation. The emergence of individuals who could punch through the partition, who could, in the most extreme cases, perceive the actual architecture of the reality management that the Dominion had spent 400,000 years constructing and maintaining. That was a different order of problem entirely. He folded his hands behind his back and looked at the planet for a long, quiet moment. It was beautiful, in the way that young, water-rich worlds always were. The same aesthetic quality, the same profligate life, the same reckless abundance. He had seen 17 of them in his career, and they had all produced psionics at some point. All of them had eventually been managed. "Send the retrieval unit," he said, "and send the full suppression roster. I want this done before the asset understands what she is." He did not say, "before anyone else understands what she is." He didn't need to. Len Aureus understood the implication perfectly, and the slight widening of his primary eyes confirmed it. The Dominion had protocols for this, clean, efficient, thoroughly tested protocols. An individual extracted before they understood their own significance was an individual who could not resist, could not be used as a focal point, could not, in the particular terrible phrase from the Emergence Protocols archive, become a symbol. Symbols were the real problem. The Dominion could manage people. It had been managing people across 100 species for longer than most of those species could count. What it could not manage, had never found a protocol for, was the moment when a managed thing became, to the people around it, something worth dying to protect. The blue and white and brown world kept spinning. The taverna on Athena Street had been there since before Costas was born, and Costas was not young. The paint on the sign outside had faded to the point where only the ghost of the letters remained, which suited the place perfectly. It was exactly the kind of establishment that preferred not to be found by anyone who didn't already know where it was. Inside, in the blue-washed noonshade, 2 men were having an argument that had technically been ongoing since 1971. "I'm saying it doesn't work," said the taller of the 2, whose name was Bobby Carras, and who had the particular kind of face that women tended to trust far longer than they should have. He wore American enough, which in his case meant he'd been born in Chicago to a Greek father and an Irish mother and had spent the intervening 31 years constructing an identity from whatever pieces suited the moment. His Greek was excellent. His English was better. His lies were fluent in both. The plan doesn't work because you're assuming the maitre doesn't know the Papadimitriou table. He does. He's known Papadimitriou for 20 years. You're going to walk up to him, say you're with the Papadimitriou party, and he's going to smile and hand you to the police. I have done this before, said Christos Galikis, with the serene confidence of a man who had been proven wrong so many times that being proven wrong no longer registered as a relevant data point. He was Greek, fully, thoroughly, aggressively Greek, with the kind of dark eyes that could be reading the room or could be thinking about something else entirely, and you never quite knew which. He had been Bobby's best friend since they were 19, when Bobby had tried to con him at a card game, and Christos had not only spotted the trick, but offered to teach him a better one. In the intervening 12 years they had been, depending on who was asking, business partners, roommates, co-conspirators, alibi witnesses, and once, very briefly, co-accused. You have done this before and it never works, Bobby said. It works often enough. Often enough to what? Christos considered this. Often enough that I'm still doing it. Bobby opened his mouth, closed it, and devoted himself instead to his coffee, which was good, and the view through the taverna door, which was better. Athens in summer moved at a particular frequency, slow and gold and slightly unreal, full of light bouncing off marble, and the smell of salt carried up from Piraeus on the afternoon wind. He had come back here 6 months ago on a ticket he hadn't paid for, intending to stay a week, and the week had accumulated around him like sediment. He did not think much about Vietnam. He thought about it the way you think about a back injury, always there, in the particular quality of certain silences, in the way loud noises still landed on him half a second too fast. He had been a radio operator in Quang Tri province for 11 months, and had come home to a country that was, in the precise and technical sense, still the same country, but felt like someone had remodeled the inside while he was gone. He had found it easier, in the end, to come somewhere that had always felt foreign. Foreign he could navigate. Foreign made sense. Besides, Christos said, we're not trying to con the Papadimitriou table today. Then what are we trying to do today? We are trying not to pay for this coffee. Bobby looked at the bill between them, which was not large. He looked at Christos. He looked at the bill again. You want to skip out on a 600 drachma coffee tab. I want to practice the fundamentals. You get rusty if you don't practice the fundamentals. I have rent coming up, so do I. That's why we practice. Christos was already tucking his napkin under the rim of his saucer in the particular arrangement that meant, in the private language of their partnership, that they were about to leave in a way that precluded the normal exchange of currency. Now, the woman at table 4 by the window, she's been reading that same page for 20 minutes, and she's going to look up in about 30 seconds when that cat from the street comes in through the side door. When she looks up, we walk. Bobby looked at table 4. There was indeed a woman there, mid-50s, elegantly dressed in the way that speaks not of money but of the habit of money, the kind of composed beauty that doesn't announce itself. She was reading something, a paperback, its spine cracked with use. How do you know there's a cat? Bobby said. There's always a cat. This is Athens, and there was, as it happened, a cat, a thin, imperious orange thing that came through the side entrance with the authority of an owner returning to his property, and the woman at table 4 looked up, and Bobby and Christos stood together and moved toward the door in the unhurried way of men who had already paid and were simply leaving. They made it 4 steps. Gentlemen, said the woman at table 4. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. They stopped. Not because her tone was threatening. It wasn't exactly. They stopped because there was something in the quality of her attention that made stopping feel like the only sensible option, the way you stop when you step off a curb and hear traffic coming. Bobby had a particular sensitivity to that quality, had developed it in the field, the ability to recognize when someone was tracking you with a precision that exceeded normal human watchfulness. He turned around. The woman was looking at them with an expression of perfect composure and mild amusement. She had closed the paperback. He could see the cover now, something English, a novel, and set it precisely on the table in front of her. Her hands were folded. She looked, Bobby thought, like someone who had been waiting for them specifically, which was impossible, because they had not known themselves that they would be here today until 40 minutes ago. I have a proposition for you both, the woman said. in Greek that had a faint accent he couldn't immediately place. Nothing criminal. Well, not very criminal, and it pays. We weren't. Christos started. You were going to leave without paying, the woman said, and I was going to let you, because I've been watching you for 15 minutes and I think you're exactly who I need. Please sit down. Bobby looked at Christos. Christos looked at Bobby. They sat down. Her name was Geraldine Hartman, and she had the particular quality of a person who was frightened, but refused to let the fear become the largest thing in the room. She was American, originally, though she had lived in Europe for the better part of 30 years. Athens most recently, before that Paris, before that places she mentioned only as directions, east of here, north of that. She had a daughter. The daughter's name was Christina, and she was 23 years old and sitting, at that precise moment, in the apartment above the travel agency on Irmu Street where they lived, and she was, Geraldine explained with the careful language of a woman choosing her words with structural precision, gifted. Gifted how? Bobby asked. Geraldine looked at him. There was something in the look, not quite assessment, not quite recognition, more like confirmation. She reads minds, she said. Not perfectly, not all the time, but accurately enough to have witnessed something she shouldn't have. The something she shouldn't have was this. 3 days ago, on the terrace of a cafe in Kolonaki, Christina had been sitting with her coffee and her book and her particular introspective quiet when the man at the next table had thought, with extraordinary vividness, about the man across from him. Had thought, tonight at the safe house on Fokionos Negri, the deal will close and then I will kill him. Christina had sat very still. The man across the table from the thinker had been a diplomat, Swedish. His name didn't matter except that it was attached to something, a committee, a vote, a piece of paper that was not yet signed, that apparently mattered enormously to certain people, and equally enormously to other certain people who were working against the first certain people. She had watched them go. She had gone home and told her mother. Her mother had been in the business of gathering information, quietly, carefully, for long enough to know that the particular thing Christina had described was not local, was not Greek, was something that had tentacles that reached further than the political geography of the current moment. And then 2 men she had never seen before had started appearing in predictable patterns. Outside the apartment, near the cafe. Once, briefly, in the stairwell of the travel agency building, in a way that they abandoned quickly when Christina came down the stairs and looked at them with those blue eyes of hers, that clear, unsettling blue, and they had left without doing whatever they had come to do. She scared them off, Bobby said. She read them, Geraldine said. She told me what they were thinking. They were calculating. They were running numbers, timing, access, complications. They were going to. She stopped, smoothed the tablecloth with one finger, a precise controlled gesture. They weren't police, she said, or government, or anything I have a name for. They spoke to each other in a language I don't recognize, not Russian, not Arabic, not anything. Bobby and Christos were quiet for a moment. And you want us to, Christos began. I want you to stay close to her, both of you, for 3 days until I can get us out. Papers, transport, a connection in Thessaloniki who can move us north. I need 2 people who look like they belong, and who can handle themselves if it comes to it. She looked at Christos. I know about your training. Karate, wasn't it? 3rd Dan, she looked at Bobby. And I know about yours. Radio intelligence, but you did the hand-to-hand qualification, twice. Bobby was very still. How do you know that? Christina told me. Christina doesn't know me. No, Geraldine said. But she read the man who's been watching you for the past week. And he had you in a file. A silence gathered at the table. A silence of the specific kind that forms around information that has permanently changed the shape of the room. Bobby picked up his coffee cup. It was empty. He set it down again. How long has someone been watching me? He asked. 6 days, Geraldine said. He checks your location twice a day, morning and evening. He reports up a chain that doesn't have any national flag on it. And you know this because your daughter read him. She told me his coffee order too, Geraldine said, with something that was almost a dry smile. She finds these details come to her whether she seeks them or not. He drinks his coffee very sweet and doesn't like the taste but does it out of habit. She said she almost felt sorry for him. Christos looked at Bobby. Bobby looked at Christos. Something passed between them, not spoken, not required to be. The 12-year language of 2 people who have navigated a sufficient number of strange situations together to have developed a shorthand for this particular moment, which was, this is strange enough that it might be true, and we are, regardless, going to find out. What does she look like? Christos asked. Your daughter. Blue eyes, Geraldine said simply. Outside, Athens continued its golden afternoon entirely indifferent to any of this. They met Christina that evening. She was sitting on the balcony with a glass of water and a book she wasn't reading, watching the street below with the patient attention of someone who had learned to use peripheral vision as a matter of survival. She was small and dark-haired and had those eyes, the blue that Geraldine had mentioned, and she looked up when they came out through the balcony door with a look that Bobby recognized from certain briefings, the look of someone who already knows the answer and is waiting for you to catch up. You're late, she said in English. We stopped for dinner, Christos said. You didn't pay for it. We are between pay cycles. Christina considered this. Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile. The ghost of one, perhaps, the memory of the possibility of one. The men from this morning are going to come back, she said. Probably tomorrow night. There are 4 of them now. There were 2. How do you know? Bobby asked, though he was already arranging the data internally, the way he'd been trained to, building the map of what he knew and what he didn't. I know because I can hear them, Christina said. Not words exactly, more like intent, direction, the shape of a plan before it becomes language. She looked down at the street. It's like hearing a song from very far away. You can't make out the lyrics, but you know if it's a sad song or a dangerous one. Bobby sat down on the other balcony chair. Christos leaned against the railing with the studied casualness of a man who was actually paying very careful attention. Tell me about them, Bobby said. The men. What do they feel like? Christina was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had shifted into something more careful, more precise, the way people speak when they are reporting, rather than observing. They don't feel like people who are angry at us, or people who want revenge or money or any of the normal things they feel like. She searched for the word. Maintenance. We are a problem in a system, and they are going to resolve the problem the way you'd fix a loose connection in a circuit. It's very clean, very impersonal. She paused. That's what frightens me most, that to them the cleaning up of a person is the same kind of task as any other. Bobby was quiet for a long time after that. He had been in the business of war, briefly, and what he had taken from it, the thing that sat in the back of his mind like a low constant frequency, was not the violence itself, but exactly this, the specific horror of encountering an impersonality so complete that it didn't even register what it was destroying. He had seen it in certain commanders. He had heard it in certain orders transmitted over certain frequencies, the crackling voice describing human coordinates the way you'd describe a weather pattern. He recognized it now. Okay, he said, here's what we're going to do. They started in the morning. The plan Bobby laid out was not elegant. Christos pointed this out. Bobby said that elegant plans required resources and time, neither of which they had, and that unglamorous plans executed with conviction tended to work better anyway. And Christos said that this was the kind of thing that sounded wise, but was actually just a rationalization of inadequate preparation, and Bobby said that Christos was welcome to make a more elegant plan if he had one, and Christos did not have one, so the unglamorous plan proceeded. It involved 3 things: staying mobile, staying in public, and never going back to the apartment on Irmu Street. The staying mobile part was Christos's department. He knew Athens the way a man knows a city when he has spent most of his adult life in it, navigating slightly outside the law, not the landmarks and the tourist routes but the back channels, the neighborhoods that transition without announcement, the shortcuts through covered markets and up rear staircases, and across rooftops that were technically accessible from certain windows on Siri, if you knew which windows and were comfortable with heights. Bobby had his street sense from a different education, the kind where the stakes of losing track of your position were not just embarrassment but permanent. And between the 2 of them, they moved through the city with a fluency that Christina, watching them from between, found both impressive and faintly absurd. You bicker like a married couple, she said on the first afternoon, while they were eating souvlaki from a cart in Monastiraki because it was open and public, and loud, and the men tracking them would find it inconvenient to operate in a crowd of this density. We've known each other a long time, Christos said. He doesn't listen, Bobby said. He listens constantly, Christos said. He just doesn't always agree with what he hears. That's not listening. That's, what do they feel like right now? Bobby said to Christina. He was watching the crowd, not her, but the question was direct and attentive. Christina closed her eyes briefly. It was a strange thing to watch, not dramatic, Not the theatrical head-tilting of the mediums and charlatans that Bobby had encountered in certain ports during certain years. It was quiet and internal, like watching someone concentrate hard on a sound in another room. Further away than this morning, she said. They're recalibrating. Someone told them something and they're adjusting. She opened her eyes. And there's something else. Something bigger. Something higher than them in whatever structure they're in. It's coming from. She pointed east, toward the Aegean, and then seemed uncertain of the direction, like trying to track a sound that was coming from somewhere above, not around. From that way, and from higher up. Higher up meaning what? Bobby asked. Meaning farther, Christina said. Farther than Greece, farther than I can usually reach. Bobby absorbed this. He was not a man who trafficked in the supernatural. He had grown up Catholic in the pragmatic Chicago sense, which meant he respected the architecture of belief without entirely inhabiting it. But he had also spent a year in a jungle listening to radio, signals that carried people's last sounds, and he had come away from that with a profound respect for the existence of things that exceeded his categories. Christina's blue eyes had a quality he could not quite name. They weren't cold. They weren't searching. They were simply open in a way that most eyes were not, in the way that most people kept a small locked room behind their gaze, and she apparently didn't. He thought, she sees people the way I saw coordinates on a map, accurately, without the protective softening of not knowing. He thought that must be exhausting. He thought, I need to keep her alive. The afternoon market swelled around them. A woman pushed a cart stacked with plastic containers. Two priests walked in parallel black columns through the crowd. A boy on a bicycle announced something in the tone of someone who had been told to. Announced things and was doing so with minimal enthusiasm. Christos bought 3 more souvlaki and handed them out with the serene generosity of a man, spending money he didn't technically have. Your mother, Bobby said to Christina. She's been running this kind of situation for a long time. Since before I was born, Christina said. She was involved in things, intelligence things, I think, though she never said so directly. After my father died, she moved us. Paris first, then here. She says Athens is easy to disappear in because it takes its history more seriously than its present. Smart woman, Christos said. She reads people too, Christina said, not the way I do, the old-fashioned way, through observation, through patience. She looked down at her souvlaki. She noticed you before you noticed her. That day in the taverna, she had been watching the two of you for 20 minutes before you tried to leave. She said something like that, Bobby said. She didn't just notice you were trying to skip the bill, Christina said. She noticed that you spent the whole meal checking the room, and that she nodded at Bobby. You checked it in a specific pattern, every 7 minutes, not looking for exits, checking that the things in the room were still where they were supposed to be. Threat assessment, Bobby said. She knew what that was, Christina said. She has her own version of it, she thought. These two have been in situations where not paying attention had consequences beyond embarrassment. These are the right kind of wrong kind of people, the ghost of a smile. Her words, not mine. What are the wrong kind of people? Christos asked with genuine interest. People who would say no to something unusual because it exceeded their model of how the world works, Christina said. You two don't seem to have a firm model, which turns out to be exactly what she needed. The first incident happened on the second day. They had moved Geraldine and Christina to a pension in Syria, small, cash. The owner, an old acquaintance of Christos's, who had reasons of his own to ask no questions, and Bobby had been watching the street below from the window for 2 hours when he saw them. Not because they were obviously wrong. They were good. They wore unremarkable clothes and moved with the unhurried pace of tourists. And if he hadn't been trained to look for the particular pattern of a surveillance walk, the way the spacing between two people stays just slightly, more constant than natural pedestrian drift, the way they corner at the same intervals, the way their attention is managed rather than organic, he might not have flagged them. But he had been trained. He flagged them. 2, he said, coming from the south. They'll be at the entrance in 6 minutes. Christos was already at the back window. 2 more here. They came around the other way. 4 then. Geraldine had been right. What happened next was not particularly graceful, and in later years Bobby would never quite be able to explain why it worked as well as it did. It involved Christos going out the front to create a distraction that hinged on his willingness to start a very loud, very public argument in the street, involving a claim that the vegetable seller on the corner owed him money which escalated rapidly to involve 3 other people who had their own unresolved opinions about the vegetable seller, which in turn created the kind of densely chaotic street theater that Greeks do better than any people on earth. It involved Bobby taking Geraldine and Christina out through the pension's rear entrance and through the narrow alley behind it and up a staircase in the adjacent building and across a roof that had a view of 3 streets and down into a butcher's shop whose owner, when confronted with 2 women and a large American appearing through his back stockroom, reacted with a particular Athenian stoicism that suggests one has seen stranger things and will continue to do so. It involved, at one point, Bobby carrying a side of lamb as cover while they moved through the market. It worked. The 4 men converged on a pension that no longer contained anyone they were looking for. And by the time they reorganized, Bobby and Christos and the women were 3 neighborhoods away, eating fried cheese in a cafe-neon where the television showed a football match and nobody paid attention to anyone. "The lamb was a nice touch," Christina said. "Thank you," Bobby said. "I'm improvising." "I know," she said. "I can feel you improvising. It's very loud." "What does improvising feel like?" She thought about this. "Like music without a score. You can hear the intention, but you can't always predict the notes." Bobby drank his coffee. "Are they close?" "No," she said. "But the bigger signal, the one from farther away, it's stronger now. Whatever it is, it's closer." They found Geraldine's contact in Thessaloniki by phone that evening, a man named Petros who had a fishing boat and no particular attachment to national borders, and several reasons to find the movement of passengers across the northern Aegean to be a financially reasonable enterprise. The arrangement was 48 hours Thessaloniki Pier 7, daybreak. 48 hours. Bobby laid it out for Christos on the roof of the cafe-neon, while below them, Athens made its night sounds. Scooters and laughter and the distant competition between 3 separate Vernas about whose music the street preferred. "We need to get them to a train," Bobby said. "Larissa Station is being watched," Christos said. "I called in a favor. The men, whoever they are, have people at the airport, the train station, the major bus terminals. Then we drive." "Do you have a car?" "No." "Do you have money for a car?" "No." "Then what we have is a theoretical drive." Bobby rubbed the back of his neck. He had the particular tiredness of someone who was running on the forward momentum of not stopping, the kind of energy that worked until the moment it didn't. He thought about the radio silence in Quang Tri, about the way certain situations narrowed to a single frequency, not despair, just the stripped-down clarity of being out of options and still needing to move. "I know someone who has a car," he said. "Who?" "Someone who owes me a favor from a card game in 1974. That was 2 years ago. Favors don't expire." Christos looked at him with the expression of a man who had known him long enough to be genuinely uncertain whether to believe this. "What kind of favor?" "The kind where I chose not to explain to certain people that he was cheating at cards. Significant people. People whose feelings about being cheated at cards were likely to be expressed physically." "And you think he remembers this?" "I think," Bobby said, "that men remember the moments when someone could have destroyed them and didn't." He was right. The car was available by morning. It was a Citroën, orange, not subtle but functional. They left Athens at 4 in the morning, in the blue dark hour when the city was at its most still, the streets holding only the thin residue of the night before, the last taxis, the delivery trucks beginning their rounds, a priest walking somewhere with the unhurried certainty of someone whose schedule is set by something older than traffic. Bobby drove, Christos navigated. Geraldine sat behind Bobby with her hands in her lap and the composed, forward-looking expression of a woman who had learned not to look backward. Christina sat behind Christos with her head against the window and her blue eyes open and tracking things he couldn't see. They cleared the city without incident. On the national road heading north, in the gray light coming up over Attica, the world opened into hills and olive trees and the particular silence of early morning travel, which has its own quality distinct from all other silences. The sense of being between places, neither having left nor arrived, suspended in the motion itself. Bobby had always liked this feeling. It was the closest he got to peace. "Tell me about the signal," he said to Christina after an hour. "It's not behind us anymore," she said. "Ahead?" "Beside, parallel. Moving at the same speed." Bobby checked the mirrors. The road was empty of anything obvious. A truck 200 meters back, a motorcycle farther behind that. No pattern he could read as surveillance. But Christina's version of surveillance wasn't visual. "How far?" he asked. "I don't know how to measure it in distance. It's not that kind of distance." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had the particular careful quality it took on when she was reporting something she didn't have proper language for. You know the feeling when you're dreaming and someone in the next room is trying to wake you up? The way you know they're there even though the dream is still the loudest thing? Yes, Bobby said. It's like that. Something is on the other side of a layer. It can feel me the same way I can feel it, and it's very patient. That's what I can't. She stopped. It's patient in a way that isn't human, in a way that makes patience feel like a very small word for what it's doing. Christos turned around in the passenger seat to look at her. His face in the dawn light was stripped of its usual performative lightness, the jokes and the con man's ease, and what was underneath it was something older and quieter and more careful. "Are you safe?" he asked, direct, with a simplicity that Bobby wouldn't have predicted from him. "I don't know," Christina said, "but I can feel that it doesn't intend to harm me. That's what it thinks about you specifically," Bobby said, "or that's what it intends toward all of us." The silence that followed this question lasted long enough that the road had changed. Less olive trees, more rocky escarpment, the land asserting its age, before she answered. "All of you," she said, "are secondary to it." They stopped for petrol outside Lamia. It was a small station on the edge of town. A single pump and a sleeping attendant who woke with the particular resentment of interrupted sleep and then forgot his resentment when Geraldine smiled at him and said something in Greek that Bobby didn't catch. He filled the tank while Christos stretched in the forecourt with the elaborate dignity of a tall man unfolding from a small car, and Christina stood a little way off, looking at the mountains to the west. Bobby watched her. She had a quality of absolute stillness that he had only seen before in a handful of people. In certain combat veterans, in one priest he had known as a child, in a woman in Saigon who had read tarot cards and whose eyes, he had thought then and continued to think now, looked at him from a place about a meter behind her own face. The stillness of people who had learned to live at a slight remove from the surface of the world. He walked over. "You doing okay?" he asked. Simple. In English. She answered in English, which she spoke with an accent that was German by origin and something else by overlay, something acquired, the accent of someone who had grown up in the sounds of several places and taken something from each. "I've been better. That's honest." "I am generally honest," she said without irony. "It's less work." Bobby almost laughed. "What are you looking at?" "The mountains," she said, "and the thing above them." He looked at the mountains. They were mountains, limestone, scrub, cloud dragging its gray hem across the upper slopes. "I don't see anything." "No," she said. "You wouldn't. What does it look like?" She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, "It looks like intention wearing the shape of something that moves. Like if you could see the will of a system before it made itself physical." She turned and looked at him directly. Those eyes. The blue of deep water in open shade, containing something she hadn't decided whether to say. "Are you afraid?" she asked. He considered lying, decided against it for the reasons given, less work. "Yes," he said. "But I've been afraid before, and it didn't stop anything that needed to happen." She looked at him for a long moment. "You sound like you've thought about that." "I had a lot of time in a jungle to think about things. You lost people there." It wasn't a question. He didn't treat it as one. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry," she said with a directness that made it land rather than deflect. "Not your fault." "No," she said, "but I'm sorry anyway, because I can hear it in you sometimes. The frequency of it." She touched her temple briefly, a gesture that looked half habitual, half explanatory. "You carry it very cleanly. Most people who carry that kind of thing, it leaks everywhere. Yours is contained. You wrapped it up tightly and keep it in a specific place and only take it out when you need to, which is less often than you used to." Bobby was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said again, softer. I don't do it on purpose. Reading people. It's more like breathing." "It's okay," he said. "I don't mind being read by someone who's honest about it." Christos appeared from the direction of the car, walking with his hands in his pockets and his face tilted to the sky, which had gone the particular gold of mid-morning with a scrim of cirrus high up. "Beautiful day to be running for our lives," he said cheerfully. "Are we done being contemplative? We have mountains to cross." The trouble came south of Katerini, 2 hours from Thessaloniki. Bobby saw it first. The way he always saw things first in those years, the particular sensitivity he'd never been able to switch off, the animal alertness that the jungle had rewired into something permanent. A car sitting on a gravel turnoff 300 meters ahead, engine running, 2 figures in the front, facing the road. "Don't slow down," he said. "I see it," Christos said. "Go past at normal speed." Don't look. Bobby, I have done this before. I know. Don't look. They went past at normal speed. Bobby looked at the road ahead. Hands relaxed on the wheel, the practiced performance of nothing to see here. In the mirror, the car didn't move. 100 meters back, Christos said, checking his own mirror. They're pulling out. Christina, Bobby said. Yes, she said from the back seat. They're the same ones, the same quality. And there's a third car further back than I can see. Yes, he let out a breath through his nose. Geraldine, in the bag in the back, there should be a map. Can you find me the next left turn off the main road? About 2 kilometers ahead, Geraldine said, with the calm of a woman who had apparently made peace with this kind of situation a long time ago. There's a side road toward Litachoro. Does it connect to anything useful? Depends on your definition of useful. Anything that gets us off this road. Then yes, Bobby thought fast. The thinking was not panicked. It was the clean triage quality of necessity, the way certain problems simplify themselves by removing options until only the real one remains. He had 3 civilians, a car that was not built for the kind of driving he was about to do, a pursuit with unknown resources, and a target 2 hours away. What he had on his side, he knew the car behind him was maintaining distance rather than closing. That meant they didn't want to force a stop on the main road. Too public, too many witnesses. They wanted a quieter situation, which meant 2 kilometers was enough time. He took the turn at speed. The Citroen protested. The road went from maintained asphalt to rough aggregate in about 30 seconds. The landscape shifting to rocky scrub and the first ascending fingers of Mount Olympus in the near distance. He took the next fork left, and then the next right, and then pulled off the road entirely behind a stand of pines, cutting the engine. Out, he said, quickly. Into the trees. They moved. Christos helped Geraldine. Bobby took the bag with the documents and the money and went after Christina, who was already moving upslope with a sureness that suggested she either had good instincts for terrain or was navigating by something else entirely. The first car went past on the road below after 90 seconds. Then the second. They were moving fast, not looking properly, searching forward rather than reconstructing where the orange car had deviated. In the pine trees, 4 people stood very still and breathed quietly, and Bobby counted the particular silence that follows a crisis that hasn't yet resolved into either disaster or safety. They'll come back, Christos murmured. 20 minutes, Bobby murmured back. Then we push north on foot to the next village and call a taxi. I have enough for a taxi. You have enough for a taxi but not for petrol? The taxi came up as a necessity more recently. Christos made a sound that was technically disapproving but carried within it the deep structural amusement of a man who has found his situation genuinely entertaining. It was, Bobby thought, one of the things he genuinely valued about Christos. Not the conning, not the ease with women, not the karate or the cooking or the absolute shamelessness in the face of authority. But this, the man could find the comedy in a crisis without it diminishing the crisis. He could laugh and be serious simultaneously. Bobby had known very few people who could do that. He heard something, not a car, higher up. A sound that wasn't wind and wasn't bird and wasn't anything that belonged to the acoustic vocabulary of a Greek mountainside in early autumn. It was a frequency, low, modulated, faintly resonant in his chest cavity the way very low bass frequencies did, but not a sound that a human instrument was making. He looked up. Through the pines, through the cirrus, in the sharp blue of the upper sky, something was there. It was not large, or rather, it was not shaped in a way that suggested size, which was a different thing. It was the way you might describe a geometric solid that had additional dimensions, present in 3 of them, implying several more, occupying a space that kept refusing to be exactly measured. It moved without moving. It was blue-black and precise, and it looked at him. If looking could be said to occur without eyes, the way a problem looks at its solution, he said nothing. Next to him, Christina was looking up at the same thing. Her face was still. Her blue eyes were open very wide. It's been waiting to be seen, she said, very quietly. It couldn't approach while we were moving. It needs. She stopped. Something complex crossed her face, the rapid processing of information that had no prior lexicon. It needs consent, she said, finally. It can't enter our perceptual space without consent. Something in its ethics. Something in its ethics, Bobby repeated. Yes, it has ethics, apparently. Bobby looked at the thing in the sky. It looked back. He had the absolute conviction. Not the hedged maybe of intuition, but the clean-locked certainty of direct knowledge, that what was looking at him from up there was not malicious, was not the same quality as the men in the cars, was something else entirely. Ask it what it wants, he said. Bobby, It wants to communicate with you. You can feel that, so communicate. Christina was quiet for a long moment. The thing above them was still. The pines moved in the mountain wind. From somewhere below, the sound of a car on the main road, going south, searching. It says, Christina's voice had an odd quality, the same quality as her psionic listening. The careful translation of something received in a non-verbal format into the crude instrument of language. It says the men following us are not from here, not from Greece, not from any country. They are agents of something much larger, and they came for me specifically, came for what I am, and what I am is not simply useful to them. It is, the word is something like threatening. Something about the architecture of human psionic ability that is incompatible with how they maintain control. How they maintain control of what? Geraldine asked, with the specific tone of a woman who has been following an extraordinary conversation with extraordinary patience, and has now reached the natural question. Christina looked at her mother. Everything. The silence after that word lasted a long time. What followed was not a conversation in any conventional sense. What it was, a transfer. An attempt, careful, methodical, like a surgeon choosing the least invasive approach, to compress a quantity of information that was not human-shaped into a format that human minds could hold without breaking. Christina was the medium for this. She sat against a pine tree on the mountainside, with her eyes closed and her hands flat on her thighs, and received what the thing above them was sending, and then, slowly, with the specific difficulty of translation across not just languages but categories of understanding, relayed it to Bobby and Christos and Geraldine. The Dominion, it said. Or that was the closest human concept for it, a word that implied both vastness and the specific kind of authority that comes not from consent but from the capacity to enforce. The Dominion had been managing what they called the emergence protocols for longer than Bobby's civilization had existed. When a species produced psionic individuals above a certain grade, when the signal of a mind grew strong enough to bleed through what the Dominion called the partition, they sent teams. The teams did not destroy. The Dominion was not, by its own account, cruel. It managed. It contained. It ensured that certain kinds of knowing remained properly distributed across the proper categories of beings. Christina was grade 9. In the Dominion's experience, grade 7 was the threshold for what they called uncontained resonance, the ability of psionic mind to bleed into communication with non-human intelligences, to begin, in their clinical terminology, establishing unsanctioned contact across the partition. There were 7 known grade 9s in human history. The Dominion had reached 5 of them before they came to full development. The 6th had lived in 14th century Persia and had died of plague before anyone reached her, which the Dominion's archive catalogued as a fortunate coincidence. The 7th was Christina Hartmann, sitting on a Greek mountainside in 1976. And you, Bobby said, looking up at the sky. He felt faintly absurd doing this and did it anyway. What are you? Christina translated the response with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Something the Dominion also manages, she said, or tries to. Something that exists on the other side of the partition, that has been trying to reach grade 9s for a very long time for a specific reason. She paused. It says the specific reason is to let them know they are not alone in what they are. That's it? Bobby said. That's it. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Christos, who had the expression of a man recalibrating his entire model of the world in real time, but doing so with surprising equanimity. The flexibility, Bobby thought, of someone who had always operated in a reality slightly more contingent than most people's. Geraldine spoke first, in the way she sometimes did, cutting to the practical with the precision of someone who had lived in extraordinary circumstances long enough that extraordinary was her baseline. What does the Dominion actually want from grade 9s? Not in the polished language they use internally. What is the actual fear? Christina listened, translated. Her expression shifted, not surprise. Exactly. More the particular look of someone hearing a thing confirmed that they had already suspected. It says the Dominion fears proliferation, she said slowly. Grade 9s don't just perceive across the partition, they can transmit. They can, if they develop fully and are not isolated, teach. Not formally, not like a school. But the presence of a fully developed grade 9 in a population changes the ambient psionic background. Other minds that were hovering near threshold find it easier to cross. She paused. It says it's like a sound you couldn't quite hear, and then someone opens a window and suddenly you can. A fully developed grade 9 is an open window, and the Dominion, Geraldine said, keeps the windows shut. Yes, because if they don't, Christina said, the species develops differently. Faster. In ways that the Dominion's models predict would eventually make their management structures unworkable. She stopped again. Something was moving in her face. The processing of information that required not just translation but the construction of a new framework to hold. It says the Dominion is very old. It says very old systems have a specific failure mode. They optimize for their own continuity, not for the benefit of the things they manage. They optimize for the continuation of the management itself. She looked at Bobby. It says, you already know this. You saw it in smaller form before. Bobby was very quiet. He had. In the particular way orders came down through chains of command, that it optimized for the perpetuation of chains of command. In the way that certain kinds of authority, once established, found reasons to keep being necessary. He had thought about it in the jungle, in the specific contemplative space that opens up when you have too much time and too little control, and had arrived at conclusions that he had never articulated because articulating them would have been dangerous, and also because he hadn't yet had the right words. He had them now. The management, he said, is not the point. The people being managed are the point. Yes, Christina said. The Dominion forgot that. A very long time ago, she said, if it ever knew it. Christos was looking at a point somewhere between the middle distance and another plane of reality. He had the expression he sometimes got when faced with problems that were larger than the ones his usual toolkit was designed for. Not overwhelmed, just recalibrating, finding the place where his particular skills might apply. So the reason they want her, he said, is not because she's dangerous. It's because if she's not contained, things change. Yes, Christina said. Things the Dominion doesn't want to change. Yes. Christos nodded slowly with the gravity of a man who was, underneath all the charm and the shrugging and the cheerful dishonesty about restaurant bills, someone who had strong feelings about authority that claimed to be for your benefit while being structurally for its own. Then I think, he said, that we need to get back on the road. The men in the cars, Bobby said. The Dominion's teams, how many are there? Christina asked. Listened. 6 now. They called for reinforcements when we evaded them. There are more coming, something bigger, from their perspective. Something they send when the standard retrieval protocol fails. She paused. Not to kill, to immobilize and extract. The word is something like a specialist. Very precise, very difficult to avoid. When hours, maybe less. Bobby looked at the mountains. He looked at the road below, empty for now, the brief respite of pursuers who had overshot. He looked at Christina, sitting against the tree with this information inside her. The weight of being the 7th in a long, difficult line, the weight of being the thing that made something vast and careful and thoroughly organized feel something it apparently rarely felt. Threatened. He had a strange thought. He had it clearly, in the specific voice that his mind used for the things it actually believed, as opposed to the things it performed believing. The thought was, the most human thing in this situation is not what we're up against. It's that we haven't given up. Not because giving up wasn't rational. It was, in certain technical senses, extremely rational. 6 trained operatives from an organization that managed entire civilizations were between them and Thessaloniki, and something larger was coming. They had a car they couldn't use, limited money, no weapons and no official existence in this situation because this situation was not official in any framework that existed. And yet he got to his feet, brushed pine needles from his jeans, looked at Christos, who read his face with the fluency of 12 years, and stood up without being asked. We need a plan, Bobby said. Yes, Christos said. A stupid one, Bobby said. My favorite kind, Christos said, with absolute sincerity. The plan had 4 parts. The first part involved Christos walking down to the village road and flagging a passing truck. A produce truck, as it happened, driven by a man whose name they never learned, but who had the deep, uncomplicated helpfulness of someone who sees a stranger in need and does not spend time analyzing the situation and riding it into the nearest village to make 2 phone calls and acquire 3 items: a length of rope, a portable radio, and a bottle of wine. The rope and the wine were for the plan. The radio was for Bobby, who had been without communications since Athens and found this unacceptable in a crisis. The second part involved Geraldine, who turned out to have resources that she had been holding carefully in reserve in the way that people hold emergency reserves, not wanting to spend them until spending became the only option. She had, in a hidden pocket of her coat, a contact number for a man in the Thessaloniki police. Not a corrupt contact, not a bought man, but someone who had been in an inconvenient situation 5 years ago and had been helped out of it by someone who was now owed a favor. The favor was going to be called in. The third part involved Christina. She had been talking, or whatever the appropriate verb was for the nonverbal exchange she had with the presence above them, while Bobby planned. When he outlined what he needed her to do, she was quiet for a long moment. "You want me to let it see through me," she said. "I want you to let it see them," Bobby said. "In real time. The teams, their positions, their timing. And I want it to give me that information in a form I can use." "It's not a tool," she said. "I know that. I'm not using it as a tool. I'm asking it to help. There's a difference." He looked at her directly. "It's been trying to reach you for however long it's been trying. It's here now. If it actually gives a damn about you, about what you are and what that means, then helping you get out of this seems like a reasonable expression of that." Christina looked at him for a long moment, then looked up at the sky. Something passed across her face, the complex, rapid processing that he was beginning to recognize as her version of a conversation. "It says yes," she said. She paused. "It says that the specific thing it wants you to understand is that grade 9s in human history have all eventually been neutralized or died before they could act, and that this is the first time any of them had someone who thought of them first as a person who needed practical help, rather than a phenomenon to be managed or protected or explained. It found this, another pause, longer. It doesn't have a word for the feeling. It says the closest human word might be relieved." Bobby absorbed this. "Tell it thank you," he said. "And tell it I need the positions of 6 operatives and a reliable estimate of when the specialist arrives." "You just told it yourself," Christina said. "It can hear you." The fourth part of the plan, which Bobby described while Christos was returning from the village with the rope and the wine and the radio, was the part that even Christos paused over. "You want to do what with the wine?" Christos said. "I want you to leave it on the road. Openly, they find it." "So this does what?" "It tells them we stopped here. It tells them we're on foot. It creates a specific picture of where we went." Bobby unfolded the map Geraldine had provided and pointed. "There are 2 roads that go north from here. They're going to cover both of them, which means they have to split their 6 into 2 threes. Which means that here," he pointed to a confluence on the map, 3 of them, not 6. "And we're going to be ahead of them by 4 kilometers if we move now." "And the police contact?" Geraldine said. "He's going to be at Pier 7 when we arrive, with enough official presence that the Dominion's people won't want to operate in it. They're clean, organized, they avoid situations that generate documentation. That's a very specific thing to know about an alien organization you met 40 minutes ago," Christos observed. "Christina told me," Bobby said, "while you were getting the rope." "What's the rope for?" "Getting past the fence at the industrial dock without going through the entrance checkpoint." Christos looked at the rope, looked at Bobby, looked at the rope again with the expression of someone discovering, not for the first time, that the universe had assigned him an appropriate partner. "We're climbing a fence," he said. "Yes, in the dark. By then, yes. With 2 women, one of whom is receiving transmissions from an extra-dimensional entity." "That's correct." Christos thought about this for about 4 seconds. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." They moved north through the late afternoon. Christina fed them information in real time, the team's positions, their adjustments, the moments when they were about to turn in the right direction and needed to be 1 hedgerow or 1 barn or 1 stand of trees ahead of. It was like navigating with a compass that felt the intentions of the landscape rather than just its north, and Bobby found himself adapting to it with a fluency that surprised him. The radio operator's instinct for signal, for the transmission and receipt of information in a form that had to be acted on immediately, the discipline of trusting data you couldn't verify through conventional means. He thought, briefly, and with the kind of recognition that comes with understanding something from the inside, this is what she lives in. All the time, every day, the constant incoming signal of other people's minds, their plans and fears and small cruelties and kindnesses and calculations, and no way to turn the dial down. He walked next to her for a while in silence, their pace matched. "Does it ever stop?" he asked. "It gets quieter in some places," she said. "Open countryside. Mountains are better. It's like, in cities it's white noise, everything blurring into everything else. Out here it's cleaner, individual signals. Can you shut it out?" "Sometimes, with effort." She glanced at him sideways. "You're asking because you feel sorry for me." "No," he said. "I'm asking because I'm trying to understand what it actually costs." She was quiet for a step or 2. "It costs being slightly apart," she said. Knowing too much about people before you know enough about them in the ways that matter. It costs, she considered. It costs the version of surprise that happens when you discover something unexpected and good about a person. I know things before I should, and then I have to pretend I don't while I wait for them to show me. And sometimes that's lonely, waiting for the performance of a thing you already know is true. What about Christos? Bobby asked. She made the sound that was close enough to a laugh. Christos is very loud, she said. In a good way. He thinks in color. What does that mean? It means his thoughts aren't words or images, they're textures, warmth, like static that's fundamentally optimistic. And me? He asked, and then immediately felt the slight self-consciousness of having asked. You, she said, are the quietest person I have ever been near who wasn't actually quiet. He didn't know exactly what to do with that. He let it sit. They reached the outskirts of Thessaloniki at 9 in the evening. The city came at them in lights. The harbor on the left catching the reflection of the waterfront restaurants and the Byzantine walls on the promontory above throwing their old shadows against the new light. Bobby had been to Thessaloniki once before briefly, and what he remembered was the particular quality of its noise. Larger than Athens, colder, more northern in some essential atmospheric sense, carrying the winds off the Thermikos Gulf. Christina said, they're behind us, 3 of them. The other 3 went the other road and are coming around. How far? 10 minutes, maybe 12. And the specialist? She checked. Something moved in her face. Closer than the teams, she said, coming from a different direction. She looked up at the sky above the city, where the lights blurred the stars into a general gold. It's very precise, she said. It feels like a very precise thing. Like a solution to a specific equation. Does it know where we're going? Everything the teams know, it knows, she said. But, she paused. And in the pause, something shifted in her expression. Some new information arriving. But it doesn't know about the police contact. That's outside the team's knowledge. They don't know about Petros's boat either. She looked at him. You kept those pieces separate. You didn't say them out loud and you didn't think about them near people. Operational security, he said. Old habit. She looked at him with the expression she sometimes had. That was precisely the look of someone hearing both the words and the thing behind the words. Yes, she said, that specific habit. He looked back at her, let it sit. Okay, he said, Pier 7, let's finish this. The industrial dock was south of the passenger terminal, past a section of the harbor given over to commercial fishing and the movement of goods that preferred not to be examined too carefully. The fence was chain link, 4 meters, with a security light that had a dead zone on the eastern side where a pile of abandoned shipping containers blocked its sweep. Bobby went first with the rope, threw it over a bar at the top, made the knot his drill instructor had made him tie until he could do it in darkness, on a moving surface. Christos went next, then helped Geraldine, who climbed with the calm competence of someone who had done harder things and not made a fuss about those either. Christina went last, and Bobby helped her over the top, and she dropped into his hands with a trust that was matter of fact and absolute. Pier 7 was 100 meters down the dock. Petros was there, a large, wind-burned man with a knitted cap, and the expression of someone who had been waiting longer than the plan specified and was cultivating his feelings about this. Behind him, with the studied casualness of men who were absolutely on duty, were 2 police officers who had been asked to be somewhere specific at a specific time by someone who called in a favor and who were here, present, official, the weight of their institutional visibility a different kind of shield. You're late, Petros said. We had to climb a fence, Bobby said. Petros looked at the fence, looked at the rope in Bobby's hand, looked at Bobby. American, he said, with a tone that suggested this explained the fence rather than the rope. Greek-American, Bobby said. That's worse. They were halfway up the gangway when the specialist arrived. Bobby felt it before he saw it. The same lowering pressure in the air, the same quality of attention turned in their direction from a very specific and purposeful source. He turned. It was standing at the end of the dock. Standing was not quite the right word. It occupied the end of the dock. It was tall in a way that was not primarily vertical. Tall in the sense of dimensions that exceeded the ones he was used to measuring height in. It wore something or was something that was simultaneously both, and it looked at them from across 30 meters of salt-stained dock with eyes that were white-blue and absolutely still. Behind them, one of the police officers made a sound. The other one went for his radio. Bobby took Christina's arm, not hard, not pulling her, just the simple physical contact of presence. She was looking at the specialist. Her face was open and still, and he could see her processing it. The vast, complex signal of a thing that was not a team of three, not a standard retrieval protocol, but something the Dominion sent when the problem required precision rather than force. "It wants me to come with," she said. "I know," he said. "It's not threatening, it's asking." "I know, Bobby." She turned to look at him, those blue eyes. The thing that lived in them that he had been watching for 2 days. The quality that made complete strangers do unexpected things in her direction. The weight of a mind that was open in a way most minds were not. "It says if I come with it, you'll all be safe. The teams will stand down. The whole operation will close. It only wants me." "What does it want you for?" he asked. She looked back at the specialist. "Processing, then." "Containment," she said. "Education, a facility, safe, apparently. It believes this sincerely." But she stopped. "But what?" "But away," she said. "Away from all of this, from you, from Christos, from my mother." Her voice was even and controlled, which was, he now knew, how she expressed the things that cost her most. Forever is the implication. The Dominion doesn't do partial containments. Bobby was quiet for a moment. He looked at the specialist. The specialist looked at him with those still white blue eyes. He thought about coordinates. He thought about the radio frequencies of Quang-Tri province, the crackling voices describing people as points on a map. He thought about what Christina had said on the mountainside, about the thing above the pines being relieved. That specific word, transferred across whatever distance exists between different categories of being. Because for once someone had thought of her as a person first. He looked at the thing that wanted her. He looked at the 2 police officers. He looked at Petros, standing at the boat with his hand on the mooring line. He looked at Geraldine, whose composed expression had finally cracked slightly, showing the thing underneath, which was the fear of a mother watching the moment that takes her child. He looked at Christos, who was already looking at him, and who gave him a very small nod that meant, "Whatever you're thinking, I'm with you." He looked at Christina. "What does your friend say?" he asked. "The one above us, the one who's been trying to reach grade 9s for a very long time. What does it say about this?" Christina's eyes were closed. "Processing, then open again. It says the Dominion's authority over human psionics is not a law," she said slowly. "It's a practice, a very old, very established practice, but not," she stopped, processing again, "not an inevitability. It says that what I am is a bridge between what humans are now and what humans could become if the partition doesn't hold. It says the Dominion fears that, has always feared that, and that the management of that fear has been, for a very long time, disguised as concern for human welfare." The specialist had not moved. Bobby looked at it. He had been afraid for 2 days and the fear was still there. He wasn't pretending otherwise, wasn't performing the absence of it. Fear was rational, fear was appropriate, fear was present and acknowledged, and not tonight in charge. The specialist looked back at him with those still white blue eyes, and Bobby had the sense of being measured by an instrument that was very old and very precise, and had measured a great many things. He had the further sense that the instrument had reached a conclusion and was waiting, with the patience of something that did not experience waiting the way he experienced waiting, to see if the conclusion would need revising. He stood very still and let himself be measured. He was not, he understood, impressive by any standard this thing would use. He was a 31-year-old American of mixed heritage, with a criminal history that was more undignified than serious, a military record that was adequate without being distinguished, no particular qualifications for the kind of stand he was attempting to make, and approximately $40 in Greek drachma in his left front pocket. He was standing on a fish dock in a northern Greek port city at midnight, having spent 2 days fleeing from an organization that managed civilizations, on behalf of a woman he had met 3 days ago, because she was a person and because what was being done to her was wrong. He was aware of the exact quantity of sense this made. He made it anyway. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, loudly enough that, if sound meant anything to this thing, it would hear him. "We are going to get on that boat, all 4 of us, and you are going to let us, because the alternative is creating a situation with 2 police officers and a harbor master, and the kind of documentation that your organization apparently cannot tolerate. And Christina is not going to your facility tonight or any other night, because she didn't choose what she is and she didn't do anything wrong by being it, and the practice of taking people because of what they are, not what they've done, just what they are, is something that is going to end here." He was aware distantly that this was an extraordinary thing to say to an extra-dimensional agent of an organization that managed civilizations. He was also aware that he meant every word of it with the specific clarity of someone who had been in places where that kind of taking was dressed up in various institutional languages and had seen close up what it looked like without its disguise. Furthermore, he said, and he heard Christos behind him shift slightly, the small movement of someone who had not anticipated a furthermore. Every grade 9 you ever contained made a choice by not making one. They didn't know what they were, didn't know they had the option of refusing. Christina knows. She knows exactly what she is and exactly what you're offering, and she is choosing not to go with you. That choice is hers. You don't get to manage it away. His voice was level. He was not performing confidence. He had learned the difference between performed confidence and actual steadiness in a jungle where performed confidence got people killed. This was steadiness, the kind that comes from having already made the decision and having no intention of revisiting it. The specialist was still. Bobby thought about something Christina had said on the mountainside, that it was patient in a way that made patience feel like a very small word. He thought about 400,000 years of protocols. He thought about the weight of an institutional logic that had been applied so consistently for so long that it had probably forgotten it was a choice rather than a law. He thought about his mother in Chicago, who had been born in County Clare and had said, once, with the particular certainty of someone who had thought about it and arrived at a position, there are things you don't negotiate on, you just don't. Not because you're certain you can win, but because the alternative is the kind of person you don't want to be. He thought, this is one of those things. The specialist moved, not toward them. Away, a shifting, a receding, a pulling back from the physical presence of this specific moment on this specific dock in this specific city on a planet that was not going to be managed. At least not tonight, at least not this particular person. It was not a surrender. He understood that. It was a calculation, a weighting of costs, the cold arithmetic of an organization that had been operating for a very long time, making the decision that this particular engagement had exceeded its optimal parameters. The documentation risk, the police presence, the presence of the other entity, the one above, the one that had fed them position data and consented to be seen and used the word relieved, whose involvement had apparently raised the situation to a level that the specialist's operational parameters did not cover. It pulled back. The dock was just a dock again. The police officers looked at each other. The one with the radio said something Bobby couldn't hear. The other one shrugged with the practiced, elaborate shrug of a Greek man choosing, for professional and philosophical reasons, to have seen nothing specific. Petros untied the mooring line. "Are we going?" he said. "Because I have a tide." The boat moved out of the harbor at 10 past midnight. Bobby stood at the stern and watched Thessaloniki reduce itself to a line of lights against the dark landmass. Christos was somewhere forward, talking to Petros with the easy volubility of a man who can make friends on any surface. Geraldine was below with a blanket and the exhaustion of someone who had been running on compressed fear for 72 hours and had finally located the moment to let it unload. Christina stood beside Bobby at the stern rail. The Aegean was very dark and very quiet. The sky above it was clear, properly clear, the mountain clarity of a sky that hadn't been washed out by city light, and the stars were extraordinary, the Milky Way visible as a structural feature rather than an afterthought. "Is it still up there?" Bobby asked. "Yes," she said. "It will be for a while. It says it doesn't want to leave until we're beyond the operational range of the teams." "That's thoughtful." "It says you told it to be." Bobby almost smiled. "I didn't tell it to be thoughtful." "No, but you were, so it learned by example." She paused. "It says that's a very human thing, by the way. Transmitting values by demonstration rather than instruction. Is that a compliment?" "I think so." The concept of compliment is apparently a little alien to it. But the tone was warm. Bobby leaned on the rail. The water made the sounds that water makes at night, the slip and slap of small waves against the hull, the larger silence of depth underneath. "What happens now?" he asked. "For you, the Dominion doesn't just drop a grade 9. "No," Christina said. "But I have an advantage now that I didn't have before." "What's that?" "I know what I am," she said. "Before I knew about grade 9s and the partition and the Dominion and all of it, I was just a woman who heard too much and couldn't explain it and had to pretend she didn't. Now I know the shape of it, and knowing the shape of something is the beginning of being able to work with it rather than just inside it." Bobby thought about this, about the way naming things changed their nature, not the thing itself but your relationship to it, your capacity to turn and face it rather than simply carrying it. "And your friend up there," he said. The one who's been trying to reach grade 9s. What does it actually want? Not what the Dominion fears it wants. What does it actually want? Christina looked up at the stars. That careful internal attending, then, "It wants to talk," she said. "That's all. It's been alone on the other side of the partition for a very long time, aware that there are minds on this side that it could reach but not permitted to reach them, because the Dominion maintains the practice of containing the ones who could hear. She stopped, smiled, and it was a real smile this time, reaching the blue eyes. It just wants a conversation with someone on the other side. It's been waiting a very long time for someone to pick up the phone." Bobby thought about the frequency of a signal held steady across a very long distance, waiting for a receiver calibrated precisely enough to catch it. He thought about patience of a kind that made the human word feel very small. He thought about what it meant to wait that long and trust that eventually, somewhere, someone would be listening. He thought about a jungle and a radio and the specific isolation of being the one who receives things. "Well," he said. She picked up. Christina laughed. A real one, quiet and warm, dissolving into the sound of the water and the sound of the wind, small and human and entirely genuine. "Yes," she said. She did. They came into a small port on the northern Aegean coast at dawn. The light came over the hills in horizontal gold, the way it does only in that latitude, in that season, filling the fishing harbor with the long shadows of boats and making the water go from black to deep green to the brilliant cobalt of open day. A man Bobby didn't know was waiting on the dock. A connection of Geraldine's, not Petros, someone farther along the chain that led out of Greece and into northern Europe, where papers could be made and names could be changed and certain. People could, if they needed to, become other people without a great deal of official involvement. Christos and Bobby walked off the boat together. "We didn't get paid," Christos said. "I know. I want to note that for the record." "Noted. We also," Christos said, "did not get killed, arrested, or extracted by an extra-dimensional taintment specialist, so I am prepared to call this a moderate success." "That's a low bar," Bobby said. "In my experience, low bars are the ones you consistently clear." Bobby laughed. It came from somewhere genuine, the specific relief laughter of someone who has been running on compressed anxiety and has finally located permission to let it go. Christos joined him, and for a moment they stood on a dock in the Aegean dawn, laughing in the way that people laugh when the alternative has just moved far enough away to be funny. Geraldine came down the gangway with the man from the dock, and they spoke in low voices. Christina came last, stopped at the top of the gangway and looked back at the sea, at the sky above it, at whatever frequency she could receive that Bobby's instruments didn't have. The signals from the other side of a partition that was, apparently, slightly less absolute than it had been yesterday. Bobby watched her. She turned and looked at him from the top of the gangway, and those blue eyes had a quality he hadn't seen in them before. Not the careful, guarded openness of someone who has always been heard too clearly, but something more like the eyes of a person who has recently discovered that the world can surprise them. She came down the gangway. "It says goodbye," she said. "For now." "Tell it goodbye," Bobby said, "and that it was good to have the help." She listened for a moment, smiled. "It says the help was mutual. It says—" She stopped, and the smile changed slightly, became something that had memory in it. "It says it knew you'd say that." Bobby looked at her. "It could hear me that whole time?" "Yes, the whole time, the whole time." He thought about the things he had thought on the mountainside, in the car, at the dock. He thought about the things that had come up in him in the nights he'd watched from the pension window, and in the pine trees, and at the stern rail in the dark. Not all of them things he would necessarily have chosen to broadcast. "Embarrassing," he said. "It says it found humans consistently more interesting than its calculations predicted," Christina said. "And that you specifically—" She paused, listening. The smile deepened. "It says you specifically are what it has been telling itself humans were like, when other entities in its situation told it to stop being optimistic about species that hadn't yet grown up." Bobby was quiet for a moment. He looked at the sky, clear and blue and ordinary, with the specific immensity of a thing that only registers as enormous when you have recently been reminded that it has depth. He looked at Christos, who was already looking at him, who raised one eyebrow with the question he always raised when Bobby had a thought that was worth hearing. "I need breakfast," Bobby said. "Yes," said Christos. "Something good, and coffee. Real coffee." "This is Greece," Christos said. "The coffee is always real." They walked off the dock together, into the gold morning, into the town that was waking up around them, all bread and engine noise and the smell of the sea, The entirely ordinary miracle of a day beginning like all days begin, without reference to what had happened or what might, with the complete indifference of the world to the scale of what the people inside it have just survived. The signal above them, if it was still there, was quiet, not gone, quiet. The difference between silence and distance, between a conversation ended and a conversation paused. Christina walked into town beside her mother. The sun came fully over the hills. The sea did what the sea has always done, which is to keep going, with the patience of something that has never needed anyone's permission to be exactly what it is. Bobby bought breakfast for all of them, with money Christos had somehow acquired during the boat ride. He didn't ask how. He ate the bread and drank the coffee and sat in the early light with the specific quality of aliveness that follows the long night of not being certain you would reach the morning. He thought about transmission, about signals held across distance, about the particular stubbornness of choosing to keep sending when the answer might never come, about the moment the answer does. He drank his coffee. Outside, the Aegean flashed and moved in the morning light, and somewhere above the clean upper atmosphere of the earth that couldn't be seen from here but was present in the architecture of things. Something old and patient and precisely calibrated was already composing its next message for the next receiver who might someday be listening with the right kind of ears. It was not in a hurry. Some things aren't. The best ones never are.